Good morning to all of you citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. On behalf of the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, Mrs. Kamala Prasad-Bisesa, Senior Counsel, and my parliamentary colleagues, I welcome all of you, members of the media and by extension the citizenry, to the Opposition's weekly midweek press conference. Good morning again to all of you. I am of course happy to be joined by Mr. Sean Sobers, Attorney at Law, who from time to time sits in the Senate, contributing to numerous legislative proposals. And of course, Mr. Sobers, a brilliant attorney at law, is very interested in the state and affairs of our country, the running of our country, the governance of our country. Ladies and gentlemen, before I hand over to Mr. Sobers, I want to say to my brothers and sisters, our country is in calamity. We have just had one of the bloodiest weekends in this country's history, and we are set to record the highest murder toll in our nation's history. This Rowley-led PNM government has delivered the worst and most chastised budget ever. In fact, one of my own constituents, Mr. Dwayne Prasad from Felicity, messaged me this morning on the way, making my way to this press conference. And he was asking that mention must be made of the high cost of living and the price of fuel in our country, a country which has had and continue, but for bad governance, have the ability to supply its own fuel. The state of our country's infrastructure is at its worst. Persons are being cut off from access to other parts of the country. Imagine this is happening in the year 2022. Our independent institutions are being subverted at every turn. Now our justice system has been devastated by the worst scandal to plague this country in our independent history for the last 60 years. The government is silent and they refuse to respond. They are hiding behind the labeled sub judice, something that I will deal with when I make my contribution this morning. This sub judice principle is not one which can avail them. There are no matters before the criminal courts. The Attorney General is misrepresenting himself before the public worse than he did when he misrepresented his involvement in those proceedings, the Piaco proceedings before the Miami Circuit Court. So he is yet again misleading this country, having misled on that Miami proceeding, misled his involvement, putting the state of Trinidad and Tobago, its interest in jeopardy in terms of, protecting the citizenry's interest in those Miami proceedings. He has also misled this country when asked about what is the position with funding to the Commission of Inquiry into the death of those divers in the Parias, confines. And now what you are seeing is that he's conveniently employing, I saw this article only minutes before the commencement of this press conference, and this is the Guardian online article, AG Armour declines Law Association's disclosure request. And I will get into this in some more detail as I indicated before. But what you're seeing here, the essence of what the Attorney General is saying, is that he's bound by sub judice principles. Mr. Attorney General, stop misrepresenting the state of affairs. Stop misrepresenting what is your role. Stop misrepresenting what is the proper application of legal principles. You are not bound by any sub judice principles. You are not bound by any legal rhetoric that you think you can conveniently self-employ to keep quiet. And I want to say to the Attorney General, I want to say to the country, to Trinidad and Tobago, that silence It is known throughout international history. Silence is the weapon of choice of dictators. When dictators want to go down that pathway of raining tyranny on the people, on the citizenry, the weapon of choice is silence. And that is what we are seeing here today. I will, of course, develop some of these points further when I get to my part of the contribution. But for now, let me please ask my colleague and my brother, Mr. Sean Sobers, attorney at law. I know he is here to talk on a very critical matter, the critical issue of crime. And as I indicated earlier in my little run-up, crime, we have witnessed, Mr. Sobers, one of the bloodiest weekends in this country's history. I say no more, and I hand over to Mr. Sean Sobers.
Thank you very much, MP Ramberley, and good morning to all persons locked on to our weekly, midweek press briefing that we have from time to time. Just to touch a little bit before I enter my substantive contribution, the UNC, one thing that we are not void of at all is a battery of legal minds within the United National Congress. We are not void of that at all. We don't boast about it. We don't tell enough about it, but I'll tell you something this morning before I get into my contribution. Sitting to my right is MP Dinesh Ramberley, well-known legal scholar, well-known legal practitioner within the courts throughout the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago. And I am certain when he gets into his contribution, he will indicate prelucidly for all and sundry that whatever cloak of darkness that the Honorable Attorney General wishes to hide behind, he is going to be shown for the trepidatious actions, the trepidatious elements of secrecy that he tries to peddle on a constant basis to protect his P&M masters. And we as lawyers sitting down watching this go on day by day, week by week, after every single scandal has been let loose on the public, it is really high time that the Attorney General is schooled properly in the ways of the legal profession. And I see no one else more poised to do so, especially today, than MP Ramberley. And he will get into his contribution to treat with that. We have just come out of one of the holiest festivals within Trinidad and Tobago. Being part of a multi-pluralistic society, Diwali is something that all Trinbagonians participate in. And I don't know what plague that has paralyzed Trinidad and Tobago, but it appears that after every single holy event within this country, after the Easter weekend, there was a number of murders grappling and plaguing Trinidad and Tobago. And now we come to Diwali, and after this entire Diwali weekend, we were faced with a number of murders during that period of time. Some papers are quoting 11, others are quoting 15. But what is quite clear is that Trinidad and Tobago experienced another very, very bloody weekend in a period of time which is supposed to be holy, which is supposed to be reverent. And it is apparent to me that persons within this country, the criminal element within this country, continue, as I would have said at one of my very first press conferences speaking about national security issues, the criminal element continues to become emboldened, and the criminal element continues to de-evolve in terms of their activities. And just a glance at the weekly newspapers, one would recognize the headlines pointing to certain really, really heart-wrenching scenarios. A massacre within Diego Martin over the weekend, where a 3-year-old boy was the victim of gun violence. And you would look at the Guardian, it speaks to the same thing, the Diego Martin massacre. If you look at the Newsday, it speaks to the same thing, bloodbath in Diego Martin, where this 3-year-old boy was killed. And to quote from the current Prime Minister, when he was then opposition leader, as it pertains to crime and criminality within Trinidad and Tobago, he indicated clearly and frontally that if a government can't deal with the issue of crime, then that government itself is part of the problem. He went on to say, addressing other persons, anytime a government resorts to blaming the opposition, which they always do in Trinidad and Tobago, in this case, in the form of the PNM administration, for its failure to deliver on their mandate and their responsibilities to the people, it is a clear sign that they have accepted that they have outlived their usefulness. And those are two quotations from the Honorable Prime Minister that I could not agree more as it pertains to what he and his bunch of jokers should be currently doing right now, which is organizing to demit office, because they have clearly lost the war on crime. Criminals within this country are winning, and people within this country, law-abiding citizens within this country, are scared. We have been indicating for a number of occasions, on a number of occasions, that this issue with respect to crime and criminality has been constantly getting worse, day by day. Issues of emboldened criminal elements and the evolution of crime and criminality has continued to get worse. From random robberies and home invasions in broad daylight, you have occurrences now of killings and robberies on the high streets within our country in broad daylight. Major arteries within our cities, within our communities that were once safe places of commute and traversing and spending, and places of worship as well too, have been desecrated within recent weeks. This is the state of Trinidad and Tobago, that within recent weeks, I think as early as last week, the head of the San Fernando Greater Chamber of Businessmen would have indicated, as Mr. Kiran Singh, that he is appalled by the number of home invasions and robberies at the hands of armed criminals, with one of the latest incidents occurring at the residence of businessman Mohan Ratan, the owner of Ratan's Free Zone. He went on to say, it begs the question, how do we deal with this type of situation? He further indicated, however, crime has appeared to be on the increase, with no viable solutions to prevent them from occurring frequently. There is a threat of violence on entrepreneurs, and the signal is not positive for would-be investors or in continuing business activities. There is a direct relationship between the rise in criminal activities and the effect on business activities. That is something else that we have been pointing out, that how could you, as a Prime Minister, in a press conference, indicate to the world at large that Trinidad is a violent society? What does that mean? What is the message that is being telegraphed to persons who would want to invest in Trinidad and Tobago, if one of the things, the statistics that they have to check, is with respect to national security and insecurity within this country, that their investment will not be protected, that there is a rampant allowance of crime and criminality under your watch? And if it didn't come from you, if it hasn't been spoken from you, who else would they take as we say the gospel truth? This is the position that Trinidad and Tobago has been placed in, and it is not by the UNC or by the opposition. Far from. It is by your unwillingness, your political unwillingness to arrest the crime situation, to implement direct measures, and I will get to those measures that you promised, that you fooled, that you hoodwinked this country into believing when you were pandering up and down Trinidad and Tobago looking for their vote in 2020. Because unlike a lot of persons within this country, I was able to procure the PNM's manifesto for 2020 as it pertains to national security, and I will get into that very shortly. We have de-evolved in terms of crime and criminality within this country. Apart from random home invasions and shootings in broad daylight, I indicated that it was getting worse. I spoke about indiscriminate shooting with high-powered weapons, where the usage of those weapons, their intention is only to kill persons. And what transpired would have been persons who were not the intended victims of these assailants, persons who would have been in and around areas, good persons who unfortunately were in the wrong place at the wrong time, forming part of a statistic that I hate to speak of, but the truth remains the same, that they form part of a statistic called collateral damage. And I further indicated that we started to see what formed part of that collateral damage was women and children. And I told persons in September, in July and August of this year, that apart from parents having to worry about purchasing school books, apart from parents having to worry where they were going to get the money to send children to school, to provide them with a meal, to ensure that they were fully clothed, that they had all their stationery and whatnot to attend school, parents would have the added worry that they should not have in 2020 to wonder whether or not they would ever see their children when they send them out to school, whether or not they would see their children when they send them out to the playground at 3 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And what began to play off in Trinidad and Tobago is exactly equivalent to that which I spoke about on the last occasion, that you had murders of children being committed by the usage of these same assailants with high-powered rifles. What took place over the weekend, yes, it is extremely gory, yes, it is extremely worrying, but it is an addition to what has been taking place for some time now. And I don't know when Trinidad and Tobago is going to wake up and demand more from those in authority. Every single time that you vote, you sign a social contract. These people come to you with promises of a better life and a better tomorrow. And in furtherance of that promise, you have to give them your vote. And in giving them that vote, what do they promise you? They promise you national security. They promise you a good economy and a good life, a good standard of living. How many of you that are sitting here today watching what we are speaking about in this press conference, or those of you who are living your daily lives, can emphatically indicate to your friend, your family and neighbor, a stranger, that you in fact are living a good life, that the PNM has kept up their end of the bargain with respect to that social contract? No one can say that, because everyone is reeling. If it is not from crime, it is from a broken economy. If it is not from a broken economy, it is from a broken education system, and the list goes on and on and on. And the number of youths that have been murdered by the hands of these assailants, it is indescribable. But I want you to remember, if there's anything that you leave this press conference with today, you remember the names of those youths who've lost their lives, who should not have, who could have been, who should have been something in the future, adding and contributing positively to our society. They are no more. On the 22nd of July 2022, 16-year-old shot and killed Ruhobinho Ramsarub in Sawa. Remember his name. On the 18th of August in Morvan, an 8-year-old was shot in his head and an 11-year-old shot in his leg whilst playing football by a gunman who went to shoot at some persons at a shop, and the persons ran from the shop into a football field at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, where kids were playing football, and these two boys were shot. Wow. That is the reality of Trinidad and Tobago. On the 9th of October, Videsh Dukran, a Form 3 student, was killed and his body dumped, unfortunately, like garbage behind a plug shop. Wow. This is Trinidad and Tobago. On the 16th of October, unfortunately my birthday, a 9-year-old Jamal Modest was shot and killed in Enterprise Shogunas. And just this weekend, the 23rd of October, 3-year-old Nizam Owen was shot in a car in Dego Martin Main Road. Dego Martin Main Road. You know who's the MP for Dego Martin? That part of Dego Martin? The Prime Minister of this country. Where is he? Having a grand old time in Tobago, celebrating his 73 years of life in Trinidad. It is unfortunate that none of those names of those persons, those children that I have called, would ever live to see 73. And not one word from the Prime Minister on this particular issue. Especially it occurring in your own constituency.
Shame, shame.
The best that you have to do for those children and that 3-year-old is to put up some foolish picture where you standing up in front of the 2 balloons that they basically stick together, and to wish you happy birthday. That is the care and compassion that he shows for the people of this nation. For that mother who is crying out for justice. And it's not the words of MP Rambali and Sean Sobers this morning alone, you know. Right? It's not our words alone. Because that same mother would have indicated what her position was. Killers have no code. This is what she was saying in the Express. They have no code. They have no morals, no values anymore. There's no innocence anymore. Indiscriminate shooting, that is what we've been reduced to. And it is time for Trinidad and Tobago to wake up. And if after all of that, that gory picture that I have painted for you, you cannot see that something is wrong in Trinidad and Tobago, that something is wrong with the administration, that they are unable, ill-equipped, lacking political will to treat with this situation, it actually gets worse. That within the last couple of weeks in Trinidad and Tobago, we have been seeing the dismemberment of bodies and body parts being found in varying locations in this country. That is reminiscent of Mexico-style cartel, sicario killings. People may know about Pablo Escobar and Joaquin Chapo Guzman and all of those persons in those narco tales that people will speak about and whatever foolish program that people look at on Netflix to deal with those things. Those things are not TV shows, that's reality. That's biography of those persons' lives. And it is playing out in Trinidad and Tobago. Limbs are being hacked off of people and hidden indiscriminately all over this country so that they can't be identified. That is the position. That is Trinidad and Tobago for you. And speaking about that particular issue, it reminds me, I cast no aspersions on any particular sect or part of the population or persons who've now become part of the population, migrants and all. But I want the population to understand something clearly. Back in 2019, when this administration decided that they were going to allow 16,800 plus Venezuelan migrants to enter this country and to provide them with a card that would allow them to stay legally for up to a year and allow them to work as well too, the opposition raised serious questions. I was in the Senate then. And unlike what they would want to peddle in terms of their foolishness to you, that the reason that we raised those issues, because the UNC studying that they're going to make Venezuelans vote, foolishness. The motion that we brought had nothing to do with that. The furthest thing from the truth. We asked them clearly on the floor of the parliament to provide us with the answers as it pertains to the procedure that would be employed for these persons to come in to Trinidad and Tobago. The checks and balances as it pertains to vetting persons coming into Trinidad and Tobago. And the reason that we asked that, as I said before, we have a battery of lawyers. I am a lawyer. I practiced heavily immigration law in those days. And I knew how difficult it was when I had certain clients who were from other jurisdictions to procure Interpol tracing. Interpol is the body that we liaise with from time to time to procure tracing from them to know if this person has a criminal conviction in the country from which he came. And I told them it used to take months sometimes to get that information. But you're going to be busy giving out cards to persons and saying, yeah, we go check on the Interpol stuff after. And if it is, we find that they do in fact have a criminal conviction, it is a breach of whatever form that they had them fill out, and we'll go and pick them up from the location. Nonsense. How many of those persons currently stay at the locations that they would have provided to immigration? Are these killings, are these dismemberment of body parts equivalent to certain individuals who may have come into this country from places where there are significant amount of murders in foreign jurisdictions? For example, in Venezuela, there's a particular part of Venezuela called Tocapita. It is a well-known established fact that there's a lot of violence there as well too. There are many good people who come from that part of the region. But we don't know what checks and balances would have been put in place. And now we are seeing dismemberment of bodies. What is the explanation from the government on this? What is the explanation from the Prime Minister on this? Or is he too busy having cake and ice cream in Tobago to take care about this? And I told you before, I did some checking because I thought it very important that we figure out what their position was in 2020. I mean, you always have to start from the beginning. And so I found online the 2020 manifesto as it pertains to the Ministry of National Security. What promises they gave to persons, to trick persons. I suspect around that time they thought it was Halloween, right? So these are the promises, some of the promises. As a result of a number of initiatives implemented by the PNM government in 2015 to 2020 period, the situation in Trinidad and Tobago with crime and security has improved over the past 5 years. You hear lie? That is lie. And positive results are manifesting themselves with a greater presence of the police service in our communities, more proactive and efficient and effective policing, and reduced numbers of serious crime. During the period of 2015 to 2020, we have had approximately 3,452 persons who've been killed.
Wow.
And that is the position that they've adopted in their manifesto that they try to force feed you a couple of days before the election. They went on to indicate, because I won't go through everything, it's too much, it's a litany of lies and preamble. So I won't go through all of it, right? But it's there for you to read. It's painful reading, but you should attempt to see how far you can get through, right? They indicated that that they would appoint the appointment of a permanent police commissioner. But a couple months after, the Prime Minister has indicated lucidly to the country that he was the one who interfered and removed the list from the Police Service Commission. And we were left for the first time in the history of this country without a titular head of the police service.
Yes.
Right? That's what they should have put in the manifesto. They spoke about restructuring critical units in the police service, such as the Special Operations Response Team. As far as I'm concerned, when they got into office again in 2020, one of the first things they did was to dismantle many of the security apparatuses that were working. One of them being that very same Special Operations Response Team, who was responsible for bringing perpetrators to justice, especially in the Andrea Barrett kidnapping and murder. They indicated additionally provision of additional resources to the counter-trafficking unit to deal with human trafficking and deployment of multi-agency specialist teams to provide land and coastal surveillance operations and intervention. Foolishness again. They spoke about that integration of teams. Since in 2019, before this manifesto came out, Hines, as a minister in the Ministry of National Security, indicated the formation of this team. Where is it today? An I-style unit, he dubbed it. And nothing has materialized since then. They spoke about expansion and improvement of training and academic programs for prison inmates. And every single day, sometimes I receive phone calls from ex-convicts who cannot find work because there's no policy, no governmental policy with respect to hiring persons who have convictions. But this is what they're saying in the manifesto to you. They're talking about strengthening of relationships with various foreign organizations, assisting Trinidad and Tobago to fight against transnational and domestic crime. The first time we heard about this was with respect to some relationship with the ATF. And up to now, in terms of real information coming out of that collaboration, we haven't heard anything. They spoke about procurement of new state-of-the-art national CCTV system. And every single time you walk into a police station in this country, I have said it time and time again, the big screen that is in the charge room that is supposed to show CCTV cameras is blank because none of them are working. So what procuring of CCTV cameras you're talking about in your manifesto? And there's a number of other things they spoke about. Acquisition of helicopters. How much helicopters we have working? They were always complaining that they don't have fuel, they don't have this, they don't have that to run these helicopters. Procurement of interceptors. All of the interceptors that the UNC would have placed on our waters are now at Stobbles Bay. So it's a repeat of a set of foolishness that they placed here in their manifesto to treat with national security that they weren't ever serious about. The use of body cameras. The Commissioner of Police would have indicated that there's some IT problem with the body cameras, so the majority of them aren't working. Improvement of security systems in the prisons, but today there are no jammers in the prisons to prevent hits coming from our prisons from persons incarcerated inside. This is the position of the TTPS. This is the position of the Ministry of National Security in terms of a PNM manifesto that they proffered to persons in 2020 to try to procure your vote. And unfortunately they did. And that is why we say elections have consequences. Expansion of cure violence and interventive programs. But we know about this cure violence issue with respect to crime being a health problem from the Prime Minister, but no real information coming out on how to treat with these things. And as we've said it again, they are a government with no plan. The UNC was the first administration to procure funding from the IDB to look at a holistic approach to dealing with crime and criminality, because we understood that placing more boots on the ground would not deal with the situation. Locking up a set of people in impoverished areas would not deal with the situation holistically. That you had to have other systems in place to treat with single parents, systems in place to treat with at-risk youths, to get involved in communities, to partner with communities. All of those are UNC ideas. And what did they do? They dismantled every single one of them. And that is why the crime statistics between 2010 and 2015 was much lower than it was now between 2015 and 2022. A violent society under the Kit Rowley administration. That is the position in Trinidad and Tobago. And as much as we sit here and we try to indicate to you time and time again what the position is with respect to crime and criminality, we really call upon all stakeholders to do more. It is imperative that persons within this country do more. It is imperative that Trinbagonians, apart from the opposition, because we have demanded, as recently as yesterday, our members of the National Security Joint Select Committee, Dr. Munilal and Senator Lachmidial, have written demanding to bring before the Joint Select Committee the Prime Minister, the Minister of National Security, to question them as to what they are doing, if anything at all, because we have reached boiling point. I'm afraid to say that it can't get worse, but clearly it can under the PNM. It can. And before I close, I want to leave you with the words, not words of MP Rambley or words of Sean Sobers. I want to leave you with the words of a relative of the young boy who was killed, the 3-year-old young boy who was killed over the weekend in Diego Martin. She says, any code of conduct that criminals may have had not to target women and children appears to have been thrown out of the window. This was the views of a relative of Marcus Noel, the 3-year-old Nazim Owen, while speaking at the Media Forensic Science Center. That's something else they promised in the manifesto, that they was going to build a new forensic science center. Well, we're still waiting on that. They had some sign up somewhere in Mount Hope, and as far as I know, that sign was taken down. All you're seeing there is just a strip potong and dogs running around the place there. Right? Noel and young Nazim were among 4 people fatally shot in Diego Martin on Saturday night. There are no more boundaries or respect anymore. They don't care if you're a woman or a child anymore. It's just pure evil right now. Where's the love? Where's the care? He, meaning Nazim, was 3 years old. This is an innocent soul that was lost. He did not deserve that at all, especially when you realize that no one in that car was doing anything illegal at that time. They went to a wedding, not a robbery or anything like that. I don't know what is going on in this place at all. Right now, I just want justice. These are the words of the relative who lost that 3-year-old child. And it is always tethered to what I say time and time again. He who feels it knows it. Not because you sit wherever you may be sitting watching this program, this conference right now, and you don't have a relative who may have passed through gang violence or who have passed as a victim through crime and criminality, that you should not be be paying attention to what we are saying. Because it can happen to you. And the rate at which things are going, it will happen to you. And you have to understand and appreciate that they don't care. Because they live in gated communities. They have special branch who, protecting and organizing and doing other things as well too. And they have high walls and guards at their gates and electric fences and dogs of varying breeds. They are well protected and well secured off of your sweat as a taxpayer. It's time for you to demand more. Because this story here, all of these stories here, all, one day, God forbid, could eventually be your own story. MP Ramley.
Thank you, Mr. Sobers. Listening to Mr. Sobers this morning, I know, Sean, you have done a tremendous job in marshalling, the depths of how, this crime scourge is really affecting innocent people, innocent folk, law-abiding citizens in Trinidad and Tobago. I, of course, want to join. We have heard the passion with which Mr. Sobers has spoken, and how he feels very strongly about this spilling of innocent blood because of the lack of checks on the criminal elements. And Mr. Sobers, I mean the government, namely Dr. Rowley himself as head of National Security Council, Minister of National Security or Minister of National Insecurity, Minister Fitzgerald Hines. Recently, people palm it off as a joke, but I was very serious when I said that, the way they are operating, they can't catch a criminal, they can't swap a fly, even on a Sunday. So how do we expect them to catch the criminals? And you have given a tremendous run-up in terms of showing exactly how they have been failing in dealing with crime. And I also want to say that when Mr. Sobers was speaking about the migrants and the registration,
yes.
I remember that even then Minister of National Security, Minister Stuart Young, let us not forget his continuous failures as well,
Yeah.
Right? Minister Stuart Young failed miserably as well when it came to crime.
Yeah.
And instead, what we saw when it came to these migrants and when we were calling for some kind of structure, he and then Commissioner of Police, they were busy walking around Havelock Street and the surrounding streets around the Queen's Park Oval, and that registration process with their bulletproof vests, and he had a bullhorn and he was basically terrorizing these migrants who came there to be registered. That is what they were doing. So let us not forget exactly the list of failed ministers of national security. So it continues. I want to thank Mr. Sobers tremendously, and of course our love and condolences go out to those families who have lost their loved ones to this crime scourge. For those lost souls, who those persons who have died as a result of these negative activities, of course, we will pray for those souls, and really moving forward, we will continue to do our part as a government in waiting. I want to turn, crime takes different formats in any society, and we have heard about the criminal elements, but the criminal elements also delve into areas which have now traditionally become what we call white-collar crimes. And sometimes those criminals who deal in using and utilizing brute force, they also feed off of the fact when they see that the governance structure is lacking and that democracy is under assault. They feed off of these kinds of notions, what they perceive in the society, and therefore they are emboldened to commit those kind of brutish acts. So I want to talk a little bit about the fact that here it is, we are dealing with crime, albeit in a different format and more of a white-collar nature, but very serious nonetheless. And what I want to turn to is the Nelson Gate, what has already proven to be the biggest scandal of our independent nation's history. Nelson Gate, Indemnity Gate, whatever you choose to call it, the Nelson Arawi Indemnity Agreement scandal, fiasco, you could call it all of those things, but it still does not adequately portray the seriousness of what is taking place in our governance in the society. So I want to continue this discussion on Nelson Gate, which, as I indicated at the previous press conference, Mr. Sobers is the biggest scandal in the history of our independent nation. Since Mr. Sobers and I last spoke to you on this topic a couple Sundays ago, several new developments have come to the forefront which continue to illustrate why this is indeed the biggest scandal yet in our country. It is imperative, ladies and gentlemen, that we continue to speak out and demand accountability over Nelson Gate, as this scandal should never be allowed to die off. It should never be allowed to die off as another 7-day wonder. And why? Why do we say this? Because it strikes at the very root of our democracy. When we turn to democracy, it is not another word that should be bandied about loosely. In fact, it is critical to the promotion and protection of our basic constitutional rights. It impacts how we live, what quality of life we have in this country. It impacts on how freely we can talk. But most importantly, democracy provides a certain amount of social stability and a confidence in our democratic processes. Democracy, however, depends on the rule of law if it is to function effectively. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't propose to bore you with these concepts, public law concepts, constitutional concepts, legal concepts, but it is important that we skim the surface a little bit to get some kind of appreciation of what we are dealing with in our modern day democracy. Both the rule of law and public confidence in the administration of justice strengthen a democracy. These provide the foundation for the development of peaceful and prosperous societies. For these intangible but highly pervasive principles to be effective, there must be, among other things, 1, an independent judiciary, 2, access to the courts, 3, expeditious processes and determinations before the courts, and 4, equality under the law. Let me attempt to show a practical application of how this works. As citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, we are entitled, if charged with a criminal offense, 1, to be presumed innocent until proven guilty according to law. And we are also entitled, if charged with a criminal offense, to a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal. So let me repeat that. If any one of us is investigated by the police and then charged for a criminal offense, we are innocent until proven guilty by a fair and impartial system of administration of justice. In the realm of criminal law, the jurisprudence has always been that you err on the side of caution, and if one fails to reach the high standard of proof required, Mr. Sobers will tell you that is beyond reasonable doubt, the court usually acts cautiously and prefers to err on the side of caution. As such, they will let, and this is not something that we are proud of, but to make the point, as such a court will let 100 guilty men go free rather than 1 innocent man suffer. This is not we saying us, we are saying this now, us here in the opposition. This is a settled principle lasting through centuries. And I want to quote, "It is better that 10 guilty persons escape than that 1 innocent suffer." And that, of course, was William Blackstone in his seminal work, Commentaries on the Laws of England, published in the 1760s. And that is where they used that 1 innocent person suffer, that it is better that 10 guilty persons escape. But Benjamin Franklin in the early 1700s as well said, and I quote, that it is better 100 guilty persons should escape than that 1 innocent person should suffer. So whilst Blackstone said 10 guilty men, Franklin astonishingly went further to say 100 guilty men. Why do I quote these, historians and these persons, these jurists of times gone by? It shows the care we must apply when it comes to the criminal justice system. And that care we have already embodied in constitutional principles embodied in our very own constitution. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We are fortunate in that we have a very brilliant constitution, and it is a very alive document, codification of rights and principles that govern us. The citizenry has an interest and or a right that if a person is charged for having committed a criminal offense, that the Director of Public Prosecutions, the DPP, who is prosecuting the offense, should enjoy prosecutorial independence, and the accused person ought to be treated fairly according to law. So in as much as the individuals who are accused of having committed a crime, they have rights under the Constitution, we also, the citizenry, have an interest in that criminal prosecution. We have rights, and we want to know that the DPP, when he is prosecuting an offense, that he enjoys prosecutorial independence, and that the accused person ought to be treated fairly according to law. Justice, the justice that our democracy demands and caters for, is accomplished when a person who has committed the crime is found guilty by way of due process and not otherwise. Once due process of law is followed, everybody is satisfied that someone should do the time if it is they did the crime. And that is how a democracy functions. These are not my personal views, Mr. Sobers. Our Constitution embodies all of these principles. Let me quote for you a definition of rule of law from the World Justice Project Rule of Law Index 2021. This is the latest World Justice Project report. And I want to say that that report, which is 2021, actually downgraded Trinidad and Tobago in terms of its adherence to the rule of law. And, you know, I expect...
I'm not shocked at all.
I expect, you know, Minister Hines as Minister of National Security and AG Amo and whosoever to come and say, no, we were not downgraded, the way Rambley put it. You know, sometimes Minister Imbert, who I want to deal with later on, would come and say, no, we have not been downgraded by Standard and Poor's, right? We have been, you know, he takes something which is clear for everybody to see, and he says, no, we have actually been given a positive rating of approval. This is something that really strikes at our democracy, and this is what they say, and this is why you, ladies and gentlemen, citizens, must understand why we place a lot of importance in adherence to the rule of law. This is what they say: effective rule of law reduces corruption, combats poverty and disease, and protects people from injustices, large and small. It is the foundation for communities of justice, opportunity, and peace underpinning development, accountable government, and respect for fundamental rights. Traditionally, the rule of law has been viewed as the domain of lawyers and judges. However, everyday issues of safety, rights, justice, and governance affect us all. Everyone is a stakeholder in the rule of law. That comes from the World Justice Project, as I said, the latest edition, 2021. It was John Locke in the Two Treaties of Government, 1689, who said, wherever law ends, tyranny begins. So, ladies and gentlemen, why do I give this preamble? Let us now examine what is happening in our own country, and we start with the question, of course, did then Attorney General Arawi pervert the course of justice, and or did Arawi and other members of the cabinet conspire to pervert the course of justice? So I start with that question. Perverting or obstructing the course of justice simply means interfering adversely with the proper administration of justice. I repeat, when we speak about obstructing or perverting the course of justice, it simply means interfering adversely with the proper administration of justice. We, of course, as a government in waiting, we have called upon the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the acting top cop, to show their independence and to investigate whether there has been the commission of wrongdoing by former AG Arawi and other members of the cabinet. We have also called upon the police to take the necessary steps to preserve sources of evidence, including seizing cell phones, laptops, iPads, etc. There is an article which I saw recently in the newspaper, I believe it was one of the Sunday daily newspapers, where they spoke about Arawi having already cleared his phone. He had already wiped his phone, and therefore there was no longer recourse to text messages with Roger Kewal Singh, the lawyer who was acting on behalf of Nelson. So we hereby renew We reiterate that call again upon the police service to do their jobs in the interest of the citizenry. Where are your investigations, police service? Mr. Jacobs, is it that you do not want to jeopardize your chances of being appointed the next commissioner of police? Is that how the police service is now being run? Out of fear and out of some kind of benefit that one expects to receive from the government of the day, that you will be touted as the next commissioner of police in the parliament and hopefully be appointed? That is what we are seeing here, and we have to ask these questions. Is it that the police service is now the private army of Dr. Rowley and the PNM?
Gestapo.
We have to ask those questions because we are not seeing any movements on their part. Why isn't the police service, as they are frequently doing, why are they not seeking expert assistance from London experts to guide them with the Nelson Gate scandal?
$40 million.
Right? You're spending $40 million and want to bring in people, SRPs and whosoever else, which in itself is unlawful, but you are going ahead doing it time and again. What is really going on in this country, Mr. Sobers? These are things that the police service must show. They must prove their independence at times like these. The police service must investigate whether the conduct of Arawi and other members of the cabinet, including the Prime Minister, surrounding the entering of that indemnity agreement was tantamount to an inducement to Nelson to plead guilty. That is what they must start with. They must investigate whether Arawi engaged in conduct which was improper and which interfered with Nelson's free choice to plead guilty or not guilty. We will recall, and it is settled, that AG Arawi had no business with negotiating with Nelson. So issues of plea bargaining fell squarely upon the shoulders of the DPP. I mean, police service, come on, if you read the papers, you will get with it. We must also ask the police service to investigate and further investigate whether Arawi's conduct constituted harassment of Nelson or some other improper pressure upon Nelson, or more importantly, whether there was wrongful interference with Nelson so that his participation in the administration of justice became tainted or polluted. Our honorable leader of the opposition has indicated that Arawi polluted the justice system. There will have to be a full investigation into the conduct, promises or benefits that were offered on the indemnity agreement in consideration of Nelson pleading guilty. We need to know that. And that is what I am in no way holding any brief whatsoever for the Shylock of Trinidad and Tobago, Vincent Nelson. But these are matters which, if a member of the government, and here it is, you are talking about a former Attorney General, then AG Arawi, if he engaged in these kinds of conduct, the police must investigate it from beginning to end and take the necessary steps against him. That is what democracy demands, and that is what duties of police officers really demand of them now. In relation to the interactions with Nelson, offers of assistance by AG Arawi, who was acting outside his constitutional remit and interfering in the role and functions of the DPP, can hardly be described as legitimate inducements. So where are you, police service? Why are you not acting? Mr. Jacobs, you can't say that you're keeping crime down, because Mr. Sobers just told us that crime is at an all-time high and it is yet to really skyrocket. It gives us no glee or joy to speak in these kind of terms when it comes to crime and when innocent people are dying. But what are you doing, Mr. Jacobs? What are you really doing? So I am calling on the police service again to show that they are worth something, that they are worth some metal when it comes to justice for our citizenry, and they do their jobs. AG Arawi is offered to pay, and mind you, pay at taxpayer's expense, all of Nelson's legal expenses in consideration of his guilty plea and offer to testify against political opponents reeks of jittery enthusiasm and is an interference with the course of justice. Such an offer and or consequent agreement has the tendency to interfere with the accused's freedom of choice and seeks to serve an interest other than those of the accused, as well as the public's interest in having the prosecutorial independence of the DPP preserved. The next question I turn to, which we have seen as development since we last spoke about this as the opposition, were attorneys at law who were acting at the behest of Arawi complicit in perverting the course of justice? Mr. Israel Khan, Senior Counsel, who has a very long and colorful career at the criminal bar, has called upon Mr. Gilbert Peterson, Senior Counsel, and Mr. Douglas Mendez, Senior Counsel, to clear the air. According to newspaper reports, Mr. Khan, Israel Khan, Senior Counsel, asked, and I quote, "If you, my learned friends," meaning Mr. Peterson and Mr. Mendez, "if you, my learned friends, knew of all the facts and circumstances and ramifications of this agreement," that is the indemnity agreement, "then staring both of you right into your faces and looping over your heads are joint charges of Al-Rawi, Mendez, and Peterson of conspiracy to pervert the course of justice, interfering with the administration of justice, and obstructing the administration of justice," close quotation. This, of course, I have taken from the newspapers. It has been carried on all the newspapers. So, Mr. Khan, Senior Counsel, has actually referred to a potential situation of a conspiracy involving the attorneys at law who advised and or settled the Al-Rawi-Nelson indemnity agreement. I want to say categorically at this point in time that I cast no aspersions on Mr. Gilbert Peterson and Mr. Douglas Mendez. Both of them have had a very long career at the bar, and they have enjoyed good track records in their practice within the profession. But my duty here, Mr. Sober's duty, not only as attorneys at law, but a higher duty because we are public office holders. Myself as a member of parliament, my duty demands me to now rise above any cloak that I may share within the profession with these gentlemen, any personal relationship I may share with these gentlemen, which I do have personal relationships with them within the profession, but I have to rise above that. And it is all in the interest of accountability and transparency in public affairs. And this is what keeps our democracy alive. So I have to say that Mr. Khan referring to that was really, it shows that you have a member of the criminal bar, very senior member, president of the criminal bar, albeit I believe when he was asking these questions, he said he was asking it in his personal capacity. It means that Mr. Gilbert Peterson and Mr. Mendez must clear the air. I want, however, to go a bit further to examine not only whether there is a conspiracy to pervert the course of justice, but whether there is an all-out conspiracy to cover up unlawful wrongdoing and or deflect culpability of members of this PNM government and or silence the population on an obvious assault against democracy and the rule of law. An all-out cover-up. This is what I want to examine. And so I turn to the duties of the legal profession in advising on matters of public interest. We are taking the time to do this because we hope that members of the public, the media, that these are matters which will help to elicit some of the pertinent facts or issues that the government must be held to account on. The duties of attorneys at law advising the Attorney General and any other member of the government includes an active duty to protect the proper functioning of law and justice in our society. That is the duty cast upon them if they are advising the Attorney General. And I say this in the context that Faris Al-Rawi is on record as saying both Mr. Mendez and Mr. Peterson advised him in relation to that indemnity agreement. These attorneys are free and on some occasions even obliged to promote legal viewpoints and policies different from those ministers of government who perceive certain things to be in their immediate political interests. And that is where it is even more critical as an attorney at law what advice you give them. You see, the attorney's role is not to obtain for them whatever the minister/client wants. The attorney at law should not become a gunslinger for hire. Rather, the attorney at law should help his client pursue the conception of the good within the bounds of the law. So they must advise properly. That attorney at law must engage in good faith interpretation of the law and determine the difference between what the law provides and what the law can simply be made to give. So I am saying this, the attorney at law cannot be politically compassed. They cannot be a politically compassed technocrat, ignoring the meaning of the law, interpreted reasonably and in good faith. So you must not engage in quasi-legal subterfuge. And this is again something that, you know, they must clear the air and the police service must do their investigations. I come to the question, how could attorneys at law advising Al-Rawi ignore substantive principles entrenched in our constitution, such as the state may not act against individuals without legal authority, that the law must be applied in a way that is procedurally fair, and that the DPP is solely responsible for criminal prosecutions? How could advice have gone against those basic entrenched rights? Millions of dollars continue to be doled out to attorneys at law. So I want to make this point now, that while Shylock, so I move away from those attorneys now, and I want to say that while Shylock of Trinidad, Vincent Nelson, who was last seen laughing all the way to the bank, is now suing the state of Trinidad and Tobago for some $100 million, you know. Yeah. Certain attorneys at law affiliated with the present PNM regime continue to rake in taxpayers' dollars despite the entire Nelson indemnity fiasco. And I want to say we must view this in the context of a silence, a deafening silence which has been observed by everyone. Have you noticed that since the collapse of the criminal case against Ram Logan and Ramdeen, that the country has been the recipient of only one diversionary, there's another word that comes to my mind, but let me say diversionary press conference of former Attorney General Al-Rawi. Prime Minister Dr. Rowley has only, and again certain adjectives come to my mind, but let me say has only issued some sterile statements on a couple of political platforms that we should not bother him with anything to do with Nelson. Minister Young posted what I would say is a minimal self-serving statement last Sunday, giving information which I said then, Sean Sobers, and I continue to say it now, that it is self-serving to Minister Young, that he's now seeking to distance himself from the entire Nelson Gate affair. Amidst this silence of members of the government to pertinent questions being posed by media, members of the media, members of the public, and you have the Law Association, and you have civil society now speaking out, we have only silence of the senior counsel involved in the unlawfully conjured indemnity agreement. The senior counsel who drafted and or settled the indemnity agreement is now representing the state in the civil proceedings brought by Nelson.
Shame.
So despite all of these questions, despite the silence that we continue to see on the part of the government and those lawyers, despite a prominent senior counsel asking for these two, Mr. Mendes and Mr. Peterson, to clear the air, what you now have is Mr. Mendes is now involved in representing the state yet again, where Nelson is suing premised on that same indemnity agreement. So the integrity of the unlawful indemnity agreement instigated by then Attorney General Al-Rawi and drawn up by senior counsel Mr. Mendes continues to be of paramount concern. Questions arise as to the propriety of the Attorney General literally raining on the DPP's parade in relation to the latter's role over criminal matters, as evidenced by the agreement itself. The Attorney General's Defense Counsel continues to be Mr. Mendes, as I said, in litigation raised by Nelson for breach of the agreement. You have one man advising, drafting, and doing every conceivable thing possible in relation to that indemnity agreement. So an important question that must arise is whether Mr. Mendes, senior counsel, is the proper attorney to advise the state on the propriety of the agreement, or to represent the state, because the propriety of the agreement and whether there has been a breach thereof in the given facts and circumstances is something that is tenable, or whether independent legal advice from one of the many other eminent senior counsel in this jurisdiction or even outside ought to have been sought.
Correct, yeah.
This is something that is very telling. Why do you have one person who is already involved in this whole fiasco continuing now to represent the state in a matter where Mr. Nelson is suing on that agreement? Surely Mr. Mendes, senior counsel, being conflicted as it were, is not the proper person to advise the Attorney General on these matters. And when I say Attorney General, I don't mean Al-Rawi, I mean Attorney General representing the state of Trinidad and Tobago in those civil proceedings that are existing now. On any view, the facts suggest here that Mr. Mendez, senior counsel, is too intimately connected with the facts of the case on the issues that arise, and that these facts and issues are not merely formal matters. This is a case where Mr. Mendez, senior counsel's appearance as a witness may become necessary. I don't know, but it may become necessary. It depends on the pleadings. You have a claim that has been brought by Vincent Nelson, and you will have a defense. I say a defense, but it can be amended right up to the first case management conference, which is yet to be held. And even at the first case management conference, there can still be requests to amend. And depending on the issues that go forward to trial, it is very likely, highly likely, that there will be the need for Mr. Mendez to speak about the facts pertaining to this agreement. Mr. Mendez continued to act for the Attorney General, and I want to say would amount to a breach of Clause 35, Part A, Third Schedule of the Legal Profession Act, the Code of Ethics. And I want to quote it because you see, sometimes people don't take the time to read, and sometimes, you know, in the interest of expediting articles, people may not want to quote it. And conveniently, you may have a junior counsel who is elevated to senior counsel, but forgot he got elevated to senior counsel, and he forgot to take notes, and he was only a note taker, and misrepresenting his involvement in proceedings. All of these things could happen, you know. It has happened here in Trinidad and Tobago already. And depending on which hotel room they are staying in at that time, whether there is a glass door blocking the toilet from the living room, and what else, I don't know what could impact on them, that they can't recall these things. And therefore they can't apply themselves properly according to the laws that govern us. Clause 35 Part A of the Code of Ethics provides as follows, and I quote, "An attorney at law shall not appear as a witness for his own client, except as to merely formal matters, or where such appearance is essential to the ends of justice." If an attorney is a necessary witness for his client with respect to matters other than such as are merely formal, he should entrust the conduct of the case to another attorney of this client's choice. That is the Legal Profession Act. This rule is not prohibitive of an attorney appearing as a witness for his own client. An attorney can appear as a witness to merely formal matters, but in the instant case arising or surrounding this indemnity agreement, Mr. Mendez, senior counsel, potential evidence is caught by the rule. A paradigm case of an attorney crossing the line, and I will not get into this in the interest of time, but it is a judgment of then High Court Judge Justice Kokaram in Hussein's Construction versus 3G Technologies. Again, the Law Association ought not to be silent on whether there is a real risk here of Mr. Mendez, senior counsel, offending that rule of the Legal Profession Act in the Code of Ethics. Objection ought to be raised by the Law Association, and it ought to be addressed promptly. Not 2 weeks and 3 weeks and all of these things. So the Law Association, your job is not simply to take 2 to 3 weeks and pose questions and then sit back. You need to act on these matters because we are dealing with serious matters here now. No aspersions, I repeat, no aspersions are cast upon Mr. Mendez, senior counsel. But these are all matters which are known to him as an attorney at law. The bigger picture here, Trinidad and Tobago, is the interests and the welfare of the public. There has already been seriously unlawful missteps leading to the collapse of criminal proceedings. Unlawful engagement by Attorney General Arawi with Shylock Nelson has already cost the state millions of dollars, and the legal bill continues to mount with the civil proceedings presently before the courts. In the meantime, you have waning confidence in the administration of justice. I repeat, in the meantime, people are losing confidence in the administration of justice. I want to ask this question here. Do you, members of the public, honestly believe that an accused person can have a fair trial free from interference? Those of you who belong to the political arena, are you fearful of trumped-up charges and political persecution by this Dr. Rowley Arawi-led regime? Those are questions that you must answer. Think about it and answer honestly. I want to turn now to the response to AG Amor. Just minutes before coming to the commencement of this press conference, AG Amor, this is a Guardian online article. AG Amor declines Law Association of Trinidad and Tobago disclosure request. The Law Association has asked for information from this Attorney General, A.G. Armour. I want to respond off the cuff, basically, to put it this way, Sean, that, ladies and gentlemen, why are we not hearing from the Attorney General and the Prime Minister concerning what we are reading in the media? Why are we not hearing from them? Is it according to what Mr. Sobers has said, that they're busy partying for the whole week because it is the Prime Minister's birthday and he chooses to celebrate in Tobago? The information begs many obvious questions. We have had eminent senior counsel. You have Mr. Martin Daly. You have had senior counsel Mr. Israel Khan. You have Mr. Hamid Ghani. You have a lot of editorials. You have a lot of persons commenting, lawyers commenting on the state of affairs. The information begs many obvious questions. You also have the DPP, who those letters are in the public domain, where the DPP wrote to then AG Al-Rawi. The information points to conduct unbecoming of an Attorney General, unbecoming of a person who holds high public office. The unrefuted information which has been corroborated in the public domain points to a breach of the ethics of the legal profession and the rule of law. The information, ladies and gentlemen, point to a clear erosion of the confidence which people have in the administration of justice. So you tell me, A.G. Armour offering no comment on the basis of the sub judice rule when the facts are already clearly in the public domain is not an option. It is not an option for you, A.G. Armour. Hiding behind the fact that there is some appeal pending, or there is not appeal in this case. Remember, when it came to the Miami Circuit Court where he misrepresented himself and potentially perjured himself, he said there is an appeal pending, and he went on a self-imposed vow of silence. And what happened to that vow of silence? He had to break it to come out and put information in the public domain. And he will have to do it yet again, because the people of Trinidad and Tobago will not stand for that vow of silence again. That sub judice does not apply. You tried it when it came to the Miami court proceedings, and it will not apply again in this because of the Nelson civil claim against the state of Trinidad and Tobago. So hiding behind the fact that there is some proceedings is not serving the best interests of the people. But I want to turn a little bit, as Mr. Sobers pointed out, to the sub judice rule. You see, in the criminal justice system, a defendant's guilt, a person who is accused and they are defendant before the courts, should only be decided by those lawfully appointed to determine it.
Correct.
Right? So you may have a judge in some cases, and then you may have a judge and jury in other cases.
Correct.
Such a decision should be based only on admissible evidence presented in court, that is to say, evidence that is reliable and reflective of factual reality. So that is where you have the sub judice rule being formed throughout history, that media publications about an ongoing legal proceeding can potentially undermine administration of justice. So if the media publishes untested and hearsay anecdotes, these may influence the memory and mental evaluation of future witnesses connected to the case, making it in essence doubtful evidence. So justice cannot run that risk, and I repeat, in the criminal justice system. So one cannot put a defendant's right to a fair trial at risk, nor the presumption of innocence for that matter. These are critical to the rule of law. So the sub judice rule essentially means that the conversation on matters before the court must stop if it is likely to run the risk of prejudicing these rights. You tell me what before the courts is making this whole issue sub judice. There is no criminal proceedings before the courts. That is number one. And even if you want to stretch, you seriously want to stretch beyond the limits of elasticity that this sub judice rule can apply in the civil matter that you are talking about. You tell me what is in the public domain that is now going to be a discussion on the merits of the matter. We are talking about the conduct of the Attorney General. The Law Association is asking about what took place in relation to then Attorney General, his interference with the potential interference, according to them, with the DPP's office, and his conduct in securing this indemnity agreement. It is only too convenient that now in the civil proceedings, both the government and the Vincent Nelson will want to say that that agreement is a proper one. But that is in the civil court. That has nothing to do with what we are talking about here. So I want to say that Mr. Amor, the sub judice rule is not applicable here. And I challenge you to come out and say openly that I am wrong. It is not applicable here. You see, Sean, and Sean knows this, Mr. Sobers has been in the parliament from time to time. Sub judice is also a parliamentary convention and a practice that has developed in the interaction between the media and the public officials. So essentially it is a no comment, the matter is before the courts. That's what you will hear. But this self-inflicted vow of silence again on the part of the government is not going to fly with the population. How often, I ask you, Trinidad and Tobago, does this statement accompany some of their media releases, or when you're seeking press coverage on matters that are patently clear, pellucid in the public's interests? So I want to know where there's alleged wrongdoing by this PNM government, where ministers of this PNM government is involved, that whether or not we should take Mr. Amor's, self-inflicted, now he's doing it on the part of his government and on the part of his cabinet to say that there's a vow of silence that they're taking. It is sub judice. It is not sub judice. I want to say, why should the existence of that litigation between Shylock Nelson and the state in this particular case, when none of you is speaking about any criminal matter, none of you are speaking about in that matter in relation to the conduct of the Attorney General in terms of what he did in relation to inducing Nelson. Why is it that we are asking these questions, that case should somehow muzzle us? The sub judice rule as a matter of law is not applicable. That's number one. And number two, I am saying that it cannot, even by any stretch of the imagination, it cannot apply. There are too many matters in the public's interest that needs to be answered. I want to ask you today whether the decision by the Attorney General to refuse to answer pointed questions by the media and the public is based on a legal rule of duty or mere political convenience. That is what I want to ask you. Is AG Amor, I have to ask these questions as I asked it in relation to the Miami proceedings, when he claimed sub judice and that self-duty, self-imposed vow of silence. Is AG Amor or former Attorney General Arawi a defendant in criminal proceedings before the court? At this point in time, the answer is no. Is the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago a defendant in criminal proceedings before the court? The answer is still no. Has the media or members of the opposition commented on the merits of criminal proceedings existing before the courts? The answer is again no. Has anyone, Mr. Sobers, commented on the evidence being presented before the court or to be presented before the court? The answer is no. Is Prime Minister Rowley and AG Amor saying that what we are saying here in discussing these critical matters going to affect or influence a judge or a court? The answer is simply no, it does not arise. So, ladies and gentlemen, this was employed in the Miami proceedings, and when they filed the appeal, and now it is being employed conveniently yet again here in this Nelson indemnity proceedings and this in Nelson Gate indemnity scandal. I want to end with the fact that on this Nelson Gate, that in our democracy there are important interests such as freedom of speech, which is the most important consideration that must be balanced against other important principles and interests. Freedom of speech, especially at a time where you know it is an obvious scandal and it is obvious interference between the AG, then AG, and the DPP. Freedom of speech is the central basis of every democratic society, and so much so that it enjoys constitutional protection. And for the very purpose for which it enjoys the constitutional protection, we need it now more than ever. So I end there in terms of the Nelson Gate. And I know we have taken some time. There is just one last matter that we want to deal with, and that is, on the one hand, you have an Attorney General coming and saying he can't offer no comment. Members of the government can't offer any comment. The cabinet is zipped. They are silent on this whole thing. But you have one Mr. Carmen Burt, who issued a release today, and in his release, he indicated that matters are being appealed And I will try to find that release that he issued earlier today, and because I want to read it, and it is important that we deal with it. I don't know if we have it. Right, so look at it. When the courts have ruled, right? The courts have ruled. Look at this. Look at this, big wins for Dwala and Karen Nunes Teixeira, who is going up against Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley as for leadership of the PNM. When you have headlines like these, and when you have headlines like this, court awards Dwala $7.5 million, and the courts have adjudicated on matters of fact and applied established principles of law, and the government is found to have acted wrongfully and or unlawfully, then you see they don't have no vow of silence, you know, even though Minister Imbert comes and he says, we filing an appeal. By the way, how long has he said that? Since during the budget he said that is to be appealed. Yeah. And weeks later, I don't know if they are filing an appeal or not. But here it is, there is no vow of silence. They are going to appeal, but there is no vow of silence. If Minister Imbert, I wonder if we could get that quickly. I need the release. So there's a major release where Minister Imbert, and he says he has taken note of an editorial in today's Express newspaper, which refers to what it describes as government's mounting legal costs. The two particular cases which involve the Minister of Finance are Rohini Ramkissoon and Dwala Rambaran versus the state, respectively. With respect to both these decisions of Ramkissoon and Rambaran, we respectfully disagree with the decisions of the first instance judges. And that is fine. Minister Imbert, you are free to disagree, you know. The courts disagreed with your conduct and action. That is why they ruled against you. And this is what he says. However, we are constrained in what can be said in relation to these matters as they are sub judice. The sub judice, but he put out a comment, right? To say that he disagreed. In our judicial system, and this is where I find it very curious, you know, that on the one hand, it is zip. You're not going to respond to law association at all. But you have a next one who's saying, look, you're going to appeal, but he goes on to comment. Listen to what he says. In our judicial system, there is recourse to the Court of Appeal and the Privy Council to settle such legal disputes. That's fine. In many cases, our Court of Appeal overturns decisions made in High Court, and decisions in the High Court only stand if not appealed. You listen to that statement, you know. Carl Imbert is saying that in many cases, the Court of Appeal overturns the lower judges. What signal is he sending to the first instance judges, the judges of the High Court, that they are not competent, that they don't know the law, that they can't apply themselves and apply the law? You have no respect for the judges. You have no respect, and that again boils down to why it is A.G. Arawi and others interfering with the DPP. You all do not respect independent institutions. He says, so it overturns decisions made in the High Court, and it goes further, and decisions in the High Court only stand if not appealed. So what is he saying? Well, I think he is arguing contrary to Amor in respect of wanting to leave the Privy Council and accede to the CCJ, because it's these same judges who go through the system and ends up in the CCJ. So you all need to review yourself. But this is something which points to a total lack of respect for independent institutions. Minister Imbert is convenient in putting out that. And why? You know, it's sub judice. He has issues with this. Why can't you all see the issues arising in Nelson Gate and come out and issue responses? So I want to say to Minister Imbert, those monies that have been spent there, already you have to pay Dwala Rambaran $7.5 million. And in the case of Rohini Ramkissoon, findings have been made against you. And what you are not telling the people, is that it points to an unlawful interference by yourself in things that you should not meddle in. You should not interfere with the BIR, the board of the BIR. Okay. Why are you interfering with these commissioners? Why are you interfering? You went in there and you interfered with the central bank governor as soon as you came into office.
Wrongful dismissal.
So this shows a course of conduct on the part of this government of interfering with independent institutions. So I think I have dealt with that, and if we have any questions from the media.
And we have some questions coming in. Mr. Silvers, you mentioned the types of violent crime that we are seeing in the country right now. you also mentioned that some of this crime resembles that of South American gangs. Is it that your contention that they are South American gangs operating in Trinidad and Tobago?
My contention is this. The acts of violence that we've been seeing, especially with respect to the dismemberment of bodies and the body parts being strewed all across Trinidad and Tobago, is eerily similar, if not mirrors, the activities of South American gangs. I would have spoken about the Sinaloa cartel, which was headed by one Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. You have other cartels, the Gulf Cartel in Mexico, New Generation cartel in Mexico as well. It is the infamous Cali cartel and the Medellin cartel run by Pablo Escobar. Those were acts of violence that they perpetrated on persons within those countries to demonstrate a level of control and fear and outright disrespect for the government and the police service in those countries. The fact that acts of violence like that are occurring here in Trinidad, our position is this. During the period when immigrants from Venezuela, and we love our Venezuelan neighbors, when they were coming into Trinidad and Tobago, the UNC would have adopted a very charitable position with respect to treating with the Venezuelan migrants. But equally at the same time, the concern was for Trinbagonian citizens, as it should be. That was the paramount concern. And we squarely asked the government during that period of time, and preambly is correct, the person with the responsibility then was Minister Young, and we asked him through a motion that was filed by the opposition in the Senate, as it pertained to the process and procedures being adopted by the administration to allow persons to come in at large and to give them these cards to allow them to work and live within Trinidad and Tobago for a year. Generally, the ability to work in Trinidad through the Immigration Act is split up in three ways. You have either a minister's permit that is issued. You can get a permit that is issued to you when you enter the airport once you indicate that you're there to work at least at max 4 weeks within a year. And then there's a work permit that is issued to an individual when they are outside of Trinidad and Tobago once the requisite steps are adopted and taken. And as it pertains to persons legally being in Trinidad, there's a set standard that is supposed to be adopted pursuant to the Immigration Act. These people were basically throwing all of that out of the window and basically telling everybody in Trinidad who was a Venezuelan migrant, legal or illegal, come and we'll give you this card and you'll get to stay and we'll care. And our problem with that was that there was no proper vetting of the individuals who would be the recipients of these cards. The information that was contained on the form that they had to fill out was a set of bare information, asking them their names and addresses in Venezuela, wherever they came from, and where they would intend to live and stay and whatever in Trinidad and Tobago. And our primary concern is, how are you going to disaggregate the persons that would be coming into Trinidad, who would be persons who have convictions or persons who may be running away from crimes that they would have committed back at home in Venezuela? And they have never, ever been able to answer that squarely, which is generally what they always do. Run from real important questions that are being put to them. And their position was, well, we will treat it with respect to Interpol. And as I would have mentioned in the press conference, having dealt with matters like that with foreign nationals, representing them in courts within this country, I am well aware as to the position with respect to procuring and receiving criminal records of individuals from Interpol. It takes weeks, it takes months in some instances, because Interpol in some instances, it is a difficult task to procure information, especially from nations that they don't have good relations with, in this case being Venezuela. So is it that there are South American gangs operating within Trinidad? I am not seized and possessed of the information. What I am seized and possessed of is gory details and findings of body parts being strewn throughout Trinidad and Tobago. And whether it be South American gangs or local gangs descending into that arena, it is a significant problem. And it is a problem that must be dealt with by the administration, who clearly up to this point really just does not care. And that is the difficulty that we have as an opposition, and we are demanding that more be done. As I mentioned, apart from the calls by opposition leader, by MP Rambali and others within the parliament, as recently as yesterday, MP Munilal and Senator Lochmedial, who are members of the Joint Select Committee on National Security, I mean, they are truly fed up with the situation. And they have written to the chairman of the Joint Select Committee, I think is MP Scotland, to call before the committee these persons with the responsibility in the National Security Council and excuse my language, to ask them what the hell is going on. What is going on in Trinidad and Tobago? It is a war zone out there, and elements of the war zone are now being found. It is being printed in the press. We are speaking about it, but something has to be done. And that is the position.
With regards to that request by MP Munilal to have a meeting with the Joint Select Committee, the chairman of that committee, Mr. Scotland, has responded, questioning how the request to have that meeting has found its way into the public domain. What do you respond to that?
Does it matter? It is important that the request was made. There's a vested interest in finding out what is going on. This is national security. We need to know what is happening. People are afraid. And you know, it is a symptom of the PNM that runs throughout all of them, like their DNA, to talk foolishness when it is convenient for them. The fact that the request is made, that is a problem. Then you're going to hear, well, I don't think that we have the authority to summon the Prime Minister. That is a problem. And the Minister of National Security. That is a problem. It will always be some type of excuse for not picking up the mantle to deal with something with correct political will. The Law Association asks the Attorney General some questions. He have nothing to say. That is a problem. Imbert get licks in a set of matters. He want to say something. It is contrary to what he's supposed to say. It is a problem. It is a problem with the PNM. It is systematic. It will never change. And it has been so from time immemorial. And I don't know when the population is going to get up and demand more.
Mr. Silvers, the Prime Minister is head of the National Security Council. As he said, he's in Tobago right now.
Enjoying himself.
Do you think that he should also perhaps convene an emergency meeting with the National Security Council and address the dispute and murders that occurred over the weekend?
I think he should have done that since last week. I think some type of press conference should have been held. I think some type of meeting calling in all persons, recalling vacation for all police officers, every single person. They say they're liaising with people internationally. Some time ago, I remember reading something in the newspapers. Whilst they were in opposition, they indicated that in preparation for them getting into government, he sent Hines on some course in Virginia or something like that to learn policing skills or some foolishness. So, where's all of that today? So the fact that all of this has happened and now we are considering whether or not he should have a meeting, that meeting should have happened since last week. That meeting should have happened since last month. It should have happened since last year, when we would have been seeing consistently crime and criminality increasing within this country and with no end in sight. The responsibility lies squarely at their feet, and they have chosen to abdicate that responsibility. I want Trinidad and Tobago to know that. It was more important for the Prime Minister to have a birthday party, a fete, a lime in Tobago than deal with a 3-year-old in his constituency who was killed. That's where his priorities lie, you know. To fete and party at 73, as if that is some type of milestone, instead of taking care of his constituents, Trinbagonians, all of Trinidad and Tobago, of which he holds the responsibility for.
MP Ramley, in his response to the Law Association, the Attorney General has stated that he will not be making a response, that the matter is sub judice. But he also stated that, and I just want to quote him here probably, I consider there is a narrative building in the public domain which appears designed by some to preempt the director from reinstating the discontinued prosecution against Messrs. Ramlogan and Rambi when his witness becomes available. I consider it wholly inappropriate to engage in any public debate and do not propose to join the ongoing public narrative.
Well, I want to ask, the Attorney General has to particularize that statement. he has broad brushed commentary in his own mind, and he's calling it a narrative that there will be no further legal proceedings. I think we have done, Mr. Sobers, myself, and other members of the opposition, we have bent backwards to ensure that we have not spoken on the merits or demerits of any matter. We are speaking about what we are seeing in the public domain. What the Attorney General cannot hide from is that there has been a total collapse of criminal proceedings. And we have said from day one that the accused have rights. They themselves will not now be in a position to clear their names, right? Because people may want to say things, still that they ought to have been afforded certain safety mechanisms under the Constitution, but they will not avail to these gentlemen. And I am saying that what the AG cannot hide from is that at the end of the day, there has been a total collapse. And what people are asking for is why. Why? And in asking why, we have seen some very, very obvious, obscene actions on the part of government ministers aimed at, and in fact did interfere or attempt to interfere with the office of the DPP, interfere with a criminal prosecution. Two things that stand out. One, the Attorney General had no authority to enter into any indemnity agreement with Vincent Nelson. That was the authority cast under the DPP's office.
Okay.
Two, he entered this indemnity agreement and did not disclose it to the DPP. And then following on that, you are now coming to tell the DPP what the DPP should or should not do, because he wrote letters in December of 2020 talking about paying legal fees and all of these things. And the DPP made his position clear that he was not the progenitor of this indemnity agreement. Where has that come from? You see, there is something called plea bargaining, and the DPP is empowered under that to plea bargain with a witness, an accused, and therefore that is the DPP's function. Arawi in his what would appear to be his, as I said, jittery enthusiasm, went all out to ensure that they secured Shylock and to bring him here. So I want to know what narrative is being put forward by anybody that will prevent anything from taking place in any court of law. We are asking for answers for something that has happened weeks ago, and it is there for the public to see. It is a matter of public record, it is a matter of court record that there has been the total collapse of criminal proceedings.
MP. Roundley, you stated that Senior Counsel Mendez is now acting on behalf of the state in these proceedings against Mr. Nelson. Given that Mr. Mendez would have been among the two lawyers who the former Attorney General would have consulted over the indemnity to Mr. Nelson, and given that there are questions about the legality of that indemnity, what confidence should the public have in Mr. Nelson's ability to represent, in Mr. Mendez's ability to represent the state now in this matter?
Well, we are already suffering from, diminishing confidence in the administration of justice, particularly in the criminal arena. To answer your question in short, what confidence would one repose in Mr. Mendez, in him representing the state in the civil matter, is virtually nil. And the reason for that, it has nothing to do with Mr. Mendez's competence per se. He is senior counsel. He's somebody who has been, I said before, he has a track record, a long history at the bar. What is in question here is that how could you advise and or settle an indemnity agreement for Faris Al-Rawi, which it is clear that that indemnity agreement is not worth the paper it is written on. It is an unlawful agreement. It is one which unduly interfered in criminal proceedings and eventually led to the collapse of criminal proceedings. So if you are the author of that document and the circumstances surrounding that, the entering of that indemnity agreement involves your own advice, what confidence would people have in you now, bearing in mind that you have not responded in any way whatsoever, despite your colleagues at the inner bar saying that you must come and clear the air, you must clear your name, you have chosen to observe a vow of silence as well, and you go on to proceed to act on behalf of the state. So you are Judge jury and executioner in your own cause. That is what it is showing. And the Legal Profession Act also stipulates that counsel should not involve themselves in matters where they are intimately involved with the facts, and the potential is there. It is a very high likelihood that he may have to give evidence in the matter. So for all of those reasons, one would not have confidence in Mr. Mendez representing the state in the civil proceedings brought by Nelson.
You mentioned also that you think that Commissioner Jacobs should act in this matter and instigate an investigation. Is there anything in law that could compel Mr. Jacobs to act if he refuses to act?
Well, there is something called a legal duty. Police officers have a legal duty. That is something that is cast upon each and every one of them to investigate commission of crimes, to investigate whether a crime is about to be committed, and also try to prevent it. In this particular case, there is a legal duty already cast upon them, where you have a situation where there is an offense known to law of perverting and or interfering and or obstructing the course of justice. That is an offense known to law, and there is the potential commission of that offense. There is already a legal duty cast on the police service to investigate whether that has in fact occurred. And again, there is no dispute as to the collapse of the criminal proceedings. And we have seen enough evidence to show that there were movements. One would say inducements, some may say entrapment, but that is for the police to investigate so that we can get some clarity, we can have an investigation, and they can determine whether or not charges are to be laid. But to not do anything at all when it flies in the face of all the evidence that is surfacing in the public domain, against a backdrop of total silence by members of the government, the police must show that they are independent and they will ensure that democracy is protected.
Just on the decision today involving Mr. Ramram, I was just curious as to, was it appropriate for Mr. Imbert to issue that statement saying that the Ministry of Finance was going to appeal, or perhaps should the Attorney General have been the one to clarify?
It was totally inappropriate for Mr. Imbert to issue that statement. What he should have done, I don't have the statement here, what he should have done was to say that please note that this matter has been appealed. I don't know, he's unclear. It suggests, the language or the tenor of his statement suggests that it has not been appealed as yet. So I don't know what was the purpose of that. But if in fact it has been appealed, and maybe very recent as in yesterday or today or whatever it is, if it was in fact appealed, he would have said this matter is now subject of an appeal, and then shut up. Just keep quiet from there. So that would have been, you would have been alerting the public to look, there has been a challenge launched against a finding of the High Court. But that statement is totally inappropriate. And to go so far as to say many judgments are overturned in the Court of Appeal, and if not appealed, they will not be overturned, and these things. You are questioning the independence of the judiciary. What are you trying to do? Send a subtle threat to members of the judiciary that, look, Minister Imbert is out there, and he's going to be driving around watching to see what you rule upon? That can't be right. I think that statement is totally inappropriate on all counts.
Mr. Ramram was awarded $7.5 million, I believe, in damages. Mr. Imbert is going to appeal now. How much more money could this end up costing taxpayers in the long run?
Well, I think the first question that needs to be asked and answered is how much money has been spent by the government so far in defending that claim that Mr. Rambaran has brought. That's number one. And then we might be able to get an idea, possibly get an idea that we can probably guesstimate how much more money is to be spent. The rate at which Mr. Imbert is going and how he's interfering with all these persons and bodies, entities, one would imagine that it is a course of conduct that we can expect, and they will not, seek recourse in their own, justice, meaning that they will not even do some introspection and say, well, okay, I as a public officer, as a minister, I should not behave in this manner. I must take the court's directives into account and change the way I operate in my public affairs. It does not seem as though they will repent, and therefore it would mean that that matter will go to the Court of Appeal and it will have to go to the Privy Council for final determination. And nothing is wrong with that per se, but the cost, we don't know what has been spent so far, and we will be guesstimating as to the amount of money to be spent moving further.
Yeah, as Dr. Manuel would say, that's taxpayers' money being spent. Taxpayers
All of these, Mr. Sobers is right, all of these are taxpayers' dollars. These monies are not coming out of their pockets, their personal pockets. One would recall recently I asked the question in the Parliament of A.G. Amor. It was on account of his own doing that the Miami proceedings are now at risk, and an appeal has been filed against the finding of the Miami Circuit Court judge. And I asked the question whether or not he didn't want to give the answers. He said that somebody else is now dealing with the matter. He has recused himself. So he doesn't know how much money has actually been spent on White and Case, the lawyers who have come on board to take over the matter. But because, Sequel law was, they were, disqualified. And then I had to ask a follow-up question. Well, okay, you can't provide that. Are you in a position to tell me and tell the country whether you have factored in, the cabinet has factored in that you should pay these costs personally of having to go through an appeal? Because you are the author of that situation. So they don't spend any monies out of their own pockets.
Mr. Silver's last question. The opposition has called for the Minister of National Security, Mr. Hines, to be removed in the past. It appears that Dr. Rowley still has a lot of confidence in Mr. Hines. What would you like to see him do in the short term right now to try and stem the spate of murders occurring in the country?
Well, I don't think that Dr. Rowley has any confidence in MP Hines. I think no one else within the cabinet maybe wants a job. As a matter of fact, I think all of them, and we've been calling for him to go. Today we would now call on the entire cabinet to resign, because clearly they collectively have abdicated their responsibility to the citizens of this country. And it is in all areas of governance. MP Rambley would have indicated in the areas with respect to this issue with Nelson. We spoke about crime. We have had other MPs talk about education and energy, and the list goes on and on and on. But in the short term of things to be done with respect to crime, reduction in crime, I would want to call upon them to, one, get the CCTV cameras working within the country. A lot of the crime in first world countries are solved because persons work backwards. They have the CCTV footage and they are able to trace the perpetrators from the commission of the offense to wherever they may be holding out. There needs to be a renewed partnership with the community. In some instances, if that partnership calls upon a reintroduction of fees as it pertains to criminal informants, then a review should be had with respect to that. But also building up relationships between the police and the community, so persons within the community could trust that the information they provide to the police will reach the correct places and persons will be arrested, charged, and be brought before the court within a timely manner. That would go a very long way in information, pertinent and important information, truthful information, finding its way to the TTPS. I think we need a stronger hand at the helm of the TTPS. An acting commissioner of police is not something that we are happy about, and the current acting commissioner of police, his track record thus far is not something we're happy about at all. So that needs to be cleared up as quickly as possible. We also need more boots on the ground as well too. We need more police officers out in areas where we suspect crime and criminality is on a high. We also need more patrols and CCTV cameras, as I indicated before, in places where persons, unfortunately, their bodies are dumped. We spoke about the heights of Aripo, and now we are seeing dismembered bodies being strewn in various parts throughout the country where there are not patrols and there are not CCTV cameras. And then we also need a holistic approach to dealing with crime and criminality, which is something that the UNC was very proud of. We had a lot of institutions in place to help at-risk youth, varying different schools for at-risk youths to go to, varying different technical and vocational schools for at-risk youths who may not have been educationally inclined to participate in, so that they would have idle hands would have something to do when the day comes. We had grants in place for single parents as well too, so they would be able to treat with their children. It is a very difficult thing to see single parents, especially mothers, who really they work in 3 and 4 jobs and they still can't make ends meet. You have a young adolescent male in the home. He unfortunately will find something to do to assist his mother, and unfortunately, in those instances, it may very well be something illegal. So there has to be a holistic approach to treating with crime within this country, which the government is clearly incapable of doing, either by lack of political will or otherwise. I will say it as it is, or because of actual stupidity, and the country is paying for it, and they are paying for it in blood, and we need to do something about it now.
Those are all the questions we have.
I want to thank everyone as we conclude. Let me thank Mr. Sean Sobers. I want to conclude very quickly by showing these have been the headlines of our newspapers, and you will see headlines like these in articles and even on editorials. And what you see here is this one was the Daily Express of Wednesday, October 19th. Lawyers silent. So lawyers who are being briefed, lawyers who are getting their fees paid, and who are involved in these matters, we of course want some transparency and accountability. We want answers to what fees have been paid in this Nelson Gate scandal and those who have been associated with it. But this is what you see, lawyers silent. And I want to tell you very quickly as I conclude that lawyers silent, and you see another article like this where it says, and so it's not the UNC. The reason why I'm showing you this is because it's not the UNC. You see that article here? Guzzling at the legal trough. So the lawyers are making all the monies and they are remaining quiet. And that is very, very self-serving and very convenient. And yet you have another one. Look at this one. Look at this article here. Nelson's ex-attorney Scotland, no comment on plea deal affair. And what they say here very quickly, Attorney Keith Scotland declined to comment on Vincent Nelson affair, following statements made by the leader of the opposition concerning him having been retained first of all by Nelson and having initiated the proceedings, contrary to what Mr. Al-Rawi would have indicated in a press conference. And now when you're asking for answers, you're not seeing anything from them. And then this is the other thing that we saw, and this is one that I mentioned before. This was the article. You will see here, Al-Rawi did not keep texts to Kewal Singh, the Vincent Nelson fiasco. So this is why we are saying that the police needs to act very quickly. And why do I point to these things very late in our press conference? To simply make the point that citizens, you all need to stand up and make your voices heard. If you do not apply public pressure, seeking accountability, seeking transparency in governance, this government and members of the government and those affiliated with them and the lawyers affiliated with them, they intend to remain completely silent on this whole scandal. They will not answer questions. I want to commend the Women's Group, Women's Institute for Alternative Development, who put out a press release yesterday, I believe. They described the unfolding debacle of former AG Faris Al-Rawi making deals with Nelson as most vexing. So I want to commend this Women's Institute for Alternative Development, and I want to call all of civil society and all of the citizens, all entities. You need to speak out now. This is why we spoke about rule of law. Chamber of Commerce, where are the chambers of commerce? You all need to say something. We are not chastising you. We are not denigrating you. But if you all do not say something, as I started off this morning with Mr. Sobers here, the rule of law affects the way in which we are perceived for the purposes of doing business, for the purposes of foreign investment, for the purposes of tourism, for the purposes of security of our people. We have heard about all the crime. You need to speak out, because if you don't speak out now, we are at our darkest hour. You can imagine being at our darkest hour in our country's history, and we say nothing. We are heading down to the darkest, hellish depths that we can possibly imagine. So I want to thank, on behalf of the leader of the opposition, Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, who is leading a government in waiting. I want to thank all of you, the citizens, members of the media, for joining us. I know we have been a little bit lengthy today, but it is because we are dealing with a very critical matter, one being crime and the other one being crime, albeit in a different manner and fashion. So thank you very much.